From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Have a good weekend? I had an obsessive weekend. I get a bit obsessive. And I'm working on a project, an audio piece, and I just spent way too much time in the studio. It got up to like 50 degrees here in Milwaukee on Sunday. And still, I mean, that's when you know it's bad. That's when you know you're hooked. It's kind of like an addiction. It really is. When you're doing something that you know you should take a break from. Speaking of Sunday, I did stumble across Frank Luntz. You know this guy, right? He's one of these unusual people who, he looks exactly like his name implies. He looks just like a Frank Luntz. I think you know who he is. He's a pollster and a political consultant. And over the years, he seems to be a guy who knows his business. He does it pretty well. There are a lot of people like this. They know what they're talking about. They get the facts right. They're pretty reliable at finding the truth in things. And I'm talking here, academics, reporters, journalists, pollsters in this case, pundits. They seem to be Frank Luntz is a perfect example of this. Seems to do his job really well and understands what's going on, and he's a reliable source for actual news when he sticks to the news. His problem is his conclusions. So anyway, I find a lot of people like this. They know what they're talking about until then they take the facts and they extrapolate it into the weirdest analysis. Anyway, I'm getting way off track here. I'm sorry. The reason I brought up Frank Luntz is he said something really interesting on one of the Sunday shows. He said that Donald is the only person who can save the Democrats from losing both the House and the Senate. And here's the way he figures it. By the numbers he's looking at, and again, I consider him a pretty reliable source when it comes just to numbers. All right. To him, it looks like the Democrats don't have a chance. The House and the Senate are both going to flip to the Republicans this year. He said there's only one thing that can prevent that, and that's the ex-president. If he becomes very involved and gets very vocal, and if he becomes sort of the centerpiece of this thing, then, in that case, he says, the Democrats have every opportunity to keep the House and the Senate, both. Maybe even, no, this is me, not him, maybe even expand the Senate, because we know it's a 50-50 tie. We know that two states, especially Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, those are the two I'm looking at, if they can flip those from Republican to Democrat, now the Democrats have a legit advantage. Even Marco Rubio, even though the numbers, I'm not sure what the numbers are. I haven't seen him recently. It's still plenty early. Anything can happen. So let's just go ahead and say it. Marco Rubio in Florida is vulnerable. Imagine a scenario where the 22 election is just all about the Orange Menace. He just puts himself into the middle of everything. And imagine then if Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Florida all flip from Republican to Democrat. Now we got to, let's see, I got to do math in my head. That means it's a 53-47 advantage for the Democrats in the Senate. And you know what that means? That means that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema can go fry eggs. We don't have to sell them on anything. They can vote with the Republicans on every single issue. Nobody cares anymore. They become irrelevant. Because now the vote is 51-49 on Democratic initiatives. If they have a 53-47 advantage, Sinema and Manchin refuse to play ball, nobody cares anymore. How great would that be? Go ahead, vote no, vote with the Republicans all you want. So, this is probably crazy talk, but man, I couldn't help but take note of this one. Frank Luntz. God, I hope he's right. I hope he's right that the Orange Menace has the power to do this and then that he actually does it. I hope he just gets all up in this thing. All right, so, okay. Hey, speaking of the Orange Menace, he's already had an impact on the 2024 presidential election. Have you heard about this one? This story is now a couple of weeks old, at least. But I don't think you and I talked about it. The Republican National Committee, RNC, now famous for their legitimate political discourse, quote, regarding the January 6th insurrection, they have notified the Commission on Presidential Debates pretty much that they're out. Politico is reporting, in its plan to amend party rules to prohibit future nominees from participating in commission-sponsored debates, the RNC is doing the work of an aggrieved former president who complained bitterly about the debate process in 2020 and who is now expected to run again in 2024. Yet it's also reflecting popular sentiment within the party. Republicans have long complained that debates and their media moderators are biased against them. Few Republicans expect debates will not occur in some form in 2024. The commission may still mollify the RNC. Yeah, we'll see. Of course, the commission was set up in the 80s by the two parties, by the RNC and the DNC. Before that, when I was a kid, it was the League of Women Voters, I think, sponsored the debates for several years. Yeah, and that's the other thing about this. Talk about anti-democratic. There's no public accountability at all. These are private entities. You realize this, right? There's nothing public at all about the Republican National Committee or the Democratic National Committee. They are private concerns. And the two of them together collude to write the rules. So nobody would be happier than me to see the debate commission just dissolve into nothing. That'd be fine with me. Let me continue reading here. Debates could be arranged through some other organization or through candidate-to-candidate negotiations directly, the way it worked prior to the commission's establishment. Now, that's not necessarily true. Like I said, the League of Women Voters handled it. So, as of now anyway, the debate commission is still in charge of things. The RNC is threatening to pull out entirely. And the initial complaint itself, that, the liberal media has a bias against the Republicans. It's the same old story. This is classic Republican snowflake stuff. You're on an extreme right-wing fringe, and so, of course, the mainstream media isn't going to be lined up with you ideologically. Of course they're not. You think they're lined up with Bernie? You think they're lined up with me? No, of course they're not. They're center-right, basically. Around here, we talk a lot about the media bias chart, which, by the way, there's a new version I saw the other day in social media. They update it pretty regularly. Adfontes Media, ADFONTES, adfontesmedia.org, has the media bias chart. And they do a nice job of sort of tracking where everybody in the media is. And right at the center is the mainstream of the mainstream. It's PBS and NPR and the three big networks and CNN. And, they're all kind of hovering there around the center. And from my point of view, because I'm way over on the left, from my vantage point, they look pretty right-wing. The center looks pretty right-wing, right? This is basic logic here. So from way over on the right where you are, airborne off the cliff, I suppose that center is going to look far left to you. Jesus, this is like grade school stuff. How can you not understand this? I often go back to this. Either they're lying or they're stupid. There's no third option. If they honestly can't understand that the center mainstream media only appears to be left-leaning because of their position. If they can't understand that, well, then they're just stupid. If they do understand it, but they still make the claim, well, then they're lying to you. Oh, God. All right. The Orange Menace, if he runs, will likely be advantaged by increased flexibility to debate or not. His performance in his first debate against Biden in 2020 was widely viewed as a disaster, and he was perceived by viewers as the loser of both that and the second debate. So anyway, there you go. Long story short, things are in flux right now. We honestly don't know if there are going to be presidential debates. That's still a long way out. Or who's going to sponsor them, or if the debate commission is going to bow to RNC demands. We'll see. I would love nothing more than to see the debate commission just blown right out of the water, just gone forever. And we got to find another way to do this, because to have the two parties, colluding with each other to determine who gets into the debates and how the debates are run. Yeah, that ain't democracy. Nothing small d democratic about that at all. In other weekend news, when I wasn't in the studio, I did catch Bill Maher's Real Time. Now, if you're a regular listener to this program, you know that I've been trying to egg on Bill Maher, trying to create sort of a media feud with him. I want to have a fight with Bill Maher. I'm so envious of Whoopi Goldberg, because he and Whoopi have this tension going, and they're making cracks about each other all the time. In a perfect world, he'd be criticizing, yelling about me, but that's an ego thing. But Bill Maher is a really interesting guy, because he's very much one of the guys I was talking about earlier. Seems to be pretty smart, seems to get his facts right, he's articulate, but then when it comes to analyzing the information he's found and then turning that into opinion, then something gets lost. He takes a weird turn. Well, lately, and by lately I mean for like the last year, it's been forever, he's absolutely obsessed with the so-called woke, as he uses that term pejoratively, with cancel culture, which he doesn't really get. He's on the old codger conservative side of that complicated issue. But every week on his show, week after week, and I confess I do watch it, because his guests are often smart and provocative, and they represent a wide range of thought, and it's actually a pretty good show. And his writers are good. He has a mid-show break where he does a little comedy thing, and it's always pretty damn funny. His New Rules, I often disagree, but his New Rules segment, that's kind of his signature piece at the end of the show, is often, I don't know, interesting if nothing else, and always funny, at least the first part. And then he gets into his opinions. Well, that's what I want to talk about this week. Two things. I'll save the New Rules for now. I want to talk about one of his guests, Katrina vanden Heuvel. Do you know this person? She's a publisher of The Nation magazine. She really attempted, he didn't seem to understand, but at least she said it out loud for all of us to hear. She really called him out on his obsession over so-called wokeism and cancel culture. Because week after week, he'll find something in the news to show how progressives, he's so critical of the left, how progressives have gone too far. You know, you got to take down statues of Abraham Lincoln. Or if a teacher uses the wrong pronouns for a student, they can, lose their job. And this time, of course, he was just so interested in the San Francisco School Board that recalled some members who were on the wrong side of a couple of issues that he, doesn't like. He doesn't like mask mandates. And there was something to do with renaming schools, a bunch of schools, because they were named after slaveholders. And of course, he doesn't like that. And Katrina vanden Heuvel called him out. She said, "You do this all the time. You can't define the entire left by these anecdotal stories you go out and find. You certainly can't define the Democrats." She said, "That doesn't describe us. That our number one concern is renaming Lincoln Elementary School to Frederick Douglass Elementary School. I mean, yeah, if you ask us, we'd probably say, yeah, sounds pretty good to me. But it's not our number one issue. Our number one issues are big. It's Medicare for all. It's police reform. It's student debt relief. It's fighting against income inequality. And issue after issue. Now, of course, she didn't get this much time that I'm giving it to right now. When you're on that show, you got to get your points in really fast. I don't know if I could do it. I'd have to really do some serious prep work if I wanted to be on that show, because you got to make your point within a couple seconds or you're done. And so she did a pretty good job. She really tried to make the audience understand that the left generally is about the issues that most Americans really care about. This is something that I talk about on this show over and over. I just try to pound it home. If you take away the labels, if you just look at the issues, Bernie Sanders represents policy favored by great majorities of Americans. The so-called left wing, the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party, is exactly in line with the American people, and nobody seems to understand that. Name any issue, and the American people are with them. Just look at the numbers, look at the polls. But of course, you get Fox News and the talk radio world and MAGA world defining day after day after day, defining the left and defining the Democrats as out-of-control radical communist extremists. And they cherry-pick these anecdotal stories about how, just like Bill Maher does, about pronouns and statues and school names and this so-called woke stuff. So Vanden Heuvel tried to make the point, and I hope I know Bill Maher didn't hear her, but I hope his audience did, because he's guilty of that. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is because those of us on the left, we have to be vigilant. We can't let the Bill Mahers of the world convince us that we're something we're not. I was thinking during the program, I wish I could get into Vanden Heuvel's head, because a great comparison is, again, this probably takes too long. This is a very fast-moving show. This is not PBS. This thing moves really fast. But a perfect analogy is the despicable way Republicans talk about immigrants. And they use the same tactic that Bill Maher uses. They find some immigrant, someone who's undocumented, who's committed a crime, and the worst crime they can find. Some undocumented person who murdered somebody. And then they paint all 11 million undocumented folks in the U.S. as potential murderers. Now, not only is this logically unsound, it's the very pinnacle of cynicism, of manipulation, of outright racism. It's a despicable practice, but it's what they do. And in any population of 11 million people, divide them up however you want. Out of 11 million dentists, out of 11 million firefighters, out of 11 million black folks, 11 million white folks, 11 million immigrants, out of 11 million people of any group, you're probably going to find one or two murderers. That's just basic law of statistics, right? Chance, odds. You're going to find a couple murderers in any group of 11 million people that you choose. So this is what the Republicans do. And here's the comparison. Bill Maher does it every week on his show. So he goes out and finds some story about some guy in San Francisco who identifies as a female Wiccan, and he's in court fighting for his rights to use his menstrual blood. This is the kind of story that Bill Maher will find. And then he paints the entire left with this one anecdote. And every single week, he and his research team are able to find one or two or three or five stories like this and say, see, the entire Democratic Party is swept up in this wokeism. He's doing exactly what the Republicans do with immigrants. I don't know what he thinks he's doing. He's generally lefty on the basic policy of things. When it comes to the big important issues, he seems to be a sensible person. But he's so critical of the left And yeah, I suppose you can find these stories and you can get you can get off a pretty good joke. Now, here's where his role as pundit and comedian, they kind of conflict with each other. Because these kinds of stories are good as a comedian. He can make a lot of fun of it, even if some of it's tasteless or a little bigoted. I won't be the judge of that right now. But his role as a pundit, and let's face it, he is. People listen to him. He has fans. Now you're being really unfair. You don't have to be fair when you're a comedian. No holds barred when you're a comedian. But he takes it into his role as pundit, and now it's just completely unfair. Anyway, Katrina vanden Heuvel. Good for her. Oh, the main reason I wanted to talk about Bill Maher, though, he had an excellent New Rules segment talking about China, if you want to check it out. I kind of liked it. Now, I have to tell you that here's the bad part, he still came at it as scolding liberals. So for some reason, he still had to come at it from that angle. I don't know why. This is something his analyst has to figure out. But the basic point was, we don't have to apologize for China just because they're not us. In other words, from his view, and it might be true for some people, progressives get painted into a corner. Well, if the U.S. government, who we're always fighting against, is having troubles with China, well, then we're supposed to take China's side, I guess. Say, wait a minute, they're not so bad. And any criticism of them is somehow racist. Here's where Bill Maher and I are going to agree. As a progressive, you can be very highly critical of China. You don't have to choose between the U.S. and China. And by that, I mean the governments. They both can be screwed up, and they are. But it's the nature of our thinking, I think spurred on by the media. It's in their nature and our nature to polarize everything. U.S. good, China bad. And if you're a big old lefty and you're very critical of U.S. foreign policy, all of a sudden you have to say, oh, okay, well then China's good. Well, I'm here to tell you, and I agree with Bill Maher, you don't have to do that. China really does suck in 100 different ways. It's an authoritarian surveillance state, police state. The Uyghurs, that whole situation has been labeled genocide. So there are lots of reasons to not get with China. And as Maher pointed out in his little essay there are high-profile people, especially in sports and entertainment. He singled out, who did he single out? John Cena, I think his name is. If I've got that right, he's a former wrestler turned movie star. I think LeBron caught a little of Maher's ire as well. Anyway, high-profile people making multi-million-dollar deals with China. And this is something that maybe a lot of us aren't really aware of. I guess I'm not. But he showed a little graphic montage of all the ads that people like Cena and LeBron and others, they're spokespersons over there for various products. They get big-time sponsorships. And so to just sort of dive in, and then, of course, in that role, you have to be an apologist. You can't ever say anything bad about China. They got you by the short hairs. So I thought it was, by and large, a pretty good commentary, and I agreed with it. And it made me think about the issue more generally. When we lefties are so critical of U.S. government policy, and we are, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to automatically then support. Well, say, for example, now the whole thing with Ukraine, it doesn't mean we have to support Russia, say good things about Russia. Afghanistan is a good example. Yeah, so us lefties are very critical of policy toward Afghanistan for the last 20 years. So does that mean all of a sudden we're going to do a kind of a Jane Fonda thing and say, oh no, Afghanistan is great, we got to send them a lot of money? And no, it's all... Let's just be clear about this. Let's put this on its simplest terms. You can criticize both sides equally without jeopardizing your lefty cred. Let's just keep the demarcation clear. It's between the rulers, the elites. They're fighting with each other. Fine, it's like Coke fighting with Pepsi. My concern is the people. I am in complete alliance with the Chinese people, with the Afghan people. Israel, there's another great example. My God, the minute you're critical of the Israeli government, you're labeled an anti-Semite. How ridiculous is that? There's always a pretty heavy political debate going on in Israel. There's a wide range of thinking. The people themselves, some are left, some are right, some are center. There's a pretty good, healthy debate going on in Israel all the time. So, if I call Israel an apartheid state, which is pretty much undeniable now, just by saying that, I'm in agreement with, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but a third, a half, I don't know. They got lefties over there. They want justice for the Palestinians. If I plead for justice for the people of Afghanistan, call for policies that try to help them, that doesn't mean I'm an appeaser to the Taliban. There is no way on this earth I'm going to be supportive of the Chinese Communist Party just because I'm so critical of the U.S. policy. We don't have to be painted into these corners. And everybody's trying to do that. It's really happening with Ukraine, like it does every time war is on the horizon. You better choose your side or you're just not allowed. You will be accused. We talked about this last week. You'll be accused of appeasing or even siding with the so-called enemy. No, we gotta keep our enemies straight. I don't like to use that word normally, but it's a shorthand in this case. Our enemies, if we have any, hold high rank. I've spoken many times about how I feel about the deplorables. They're not my enemies. The regular rank and file conservatives, they're people like I am. We have to share this country. We have to share this world. They are not my enemy. I want to find a way for us to live together. But the people with all the money and power, writing the headlines, dishing out misinformation and disinformation, yeah. If you want to call them my enemy, go ahead. Yeah, that's accurate. Because those at the very top of the rung aren't that different. Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden and Bennett of Israel and whoever's in charge over in Afghanistan, they have a lot more in common with each other than they have with me, or they have with any citizen of Afghanistan, or Israel, or Russia. So I think if we can just keep that in mind, we got to keep our struggle clear. The struggle is between the powers and the people. We can fight for our causes more succinctly, more clearly, without the muddle and the confusion of having to somehow show this alliance to our side. No, I don't have a side. There's the power and the people, and I'm with the people. So, anyway, there you go. Just a little reminder. Don't let people paint you into a corner. And keep your perspective when it comes to the people of a nation versus the nation. All right. With that, I go. I leave you to your devices. And don't spend too much time with them. All right. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.